Welcome everyone. We're at 10 o'clock, which is my time anyway, which is the time we said we go live, but I'm just going to give it a few more minutes to allow everyone to join us. No one's meetings ever seem to finish on the dot. There all seem to be a little bit of an overrun, so we'll give people a minute or two before we join. But what will be great, obviously we have, Camilla and I have the benefit of knowing most of the names on the call, but I think it will be great if you could just pop what country you're from or what association you're here representing, or just yourself, if that's also fine. So an idea of who's on the call with us today. I can see Bangladesh, Mozambique, Senegal, Pakistan, India, as just a couple represented. I think someone else was just trying to join us but dropped off, so hopefully we'll have everybody and get going soon. Camilla, I don't know if you want to just pop a message, maybe just a reminder in the WhatsApp groups, so that we can have everyone joining us. Thank you so much. Great, thank you, Ado, for sharing. Everyone else, if you just pop which association we're from in the chat, and that way Shakil gets to see who's here as well as get to know what other associations we've got. Welcome everybody. So while we're waiting for everyone else, to give everyone else a couple of minutes to join us today, I'll just do some sort of quick housekeeping. So we are recording today's session. We are recording it because not everybody can make it. The more we grow as an alliance, the more time zone challenges that we have. So it's later in some jurisdictions, perhaps a bit too early in the day for some others. But so we're going to record it so that we can share with anybody that today, as we know that sometimes it can be challenging with getting time during the working day to attend the session. So we'll record it and we'll also pop it on our YouTube channel and also our blog as well, so that anybody that's not able to attend today can catch up on that recording. What we're also going to do as well is today's session is literally designed more of a discussion than a webinar. So you'll see that you're all able to put your videos on and unmute yourself and ask questions. And we really want to encourage you, if I'm not asking the kind of questions to Shakil that you want to know the answers to, do feel free to pop them, either pop up your hand or pop your questions in the chat, and we will get round to them. And make sure that today is as interesting for you all as association leaders as it is for us at Alliance. So we are going to be sort of getting Shakil to share the journey of Singapore Fintech Association, which is often held up there as an example for everyone to follow. So we're really delighted to have one of the industry association, one of the leaders of industry associations on the call with us today. And we'll talk about the journey from when they started, which I'm sure many of the people on the call will be more familiar with, those beginning few years, which is where quite a few of you are. But then also to sort of share that journey as to how they've managed to grow to be one of the heavy-hitting names and making great impact in the industry within Singapore itself. So Shakil, I think let's get going, and then others can sort of join us and can catch up as we're going through. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. We really appreciate it. It was really, I had the pleasure of meeting Shakil when I was in Singapore at the FinTech Festival, and we discussed running this webinar. So it's wonderful to see it coming to life. So thank you so much, Shakil.
Most welcome.
So do you want to start by introducing yourself in terms of who sort of, what your role at the association is, before I then start jumping into my questions?
Yeah, sure. Sounds good. Hi, everyone. My name is Shakil. I am from the Singapore Fintech Association, if that's not clear enough. Essentially, we are one of the more active fintech associations in Southeast Asia. And I'm really here just to share the experience we've been on since formation in 2016, all the way up to now. What works for us, what doesn't work, and I guess answer any sort of questions that anyone may have.
Wonderful. So 2016, it's been quite a journey, 8 years, but a lot of progress made. So I'm really keen, let's sort of start back in probably even before 2016, when sort of the idea for Singapore Fintech Association came about. How did it come about? What was the reasoning behind, I suppose, sort of forming, and you know, how did that formation start?
I mean, that's a good question. I may not be the right person to justify that answer, but I will give you my stab at it, right? Essentially, the Fintech Association was formed in 2016, and the announcement was made by Chief Fintech Officer Nandu Mohanty of MAS, Monetary Authority of Singapore. The reason why it was ideated in the first place was it was in line with Singapore's stance and MAS's stance on what they wanted to see out of Singapore in terms of the kind of hub that they wanted to grow Singapore to, right? Singapore is known for being multiple global hubs. Transport is one of them, or flights rather, right? It's also one of our global hubs for shipping, the shipping industry as well. And essentially, on their roadmap, they wanted it to also become the financial hub of Southeast Asia, at least. But of course, as we know, it has grown beyond that a little bit since then. So that's where the ideation came from, and the whole idea behind having a fintech association was to support the stakeholders and the market participants of the fintech ecosystem in Singapore, as well as lend itself to be somewhat of a bridge, right, for the associations around the world as well. It would be, and it still is currently operating as a very warm touch point for a lot of countries. So at any particular time, if companies, let's say from Thailand or Philippines or Malaysia, anywhere in Southeast Asia, if they're looking to come into Singapore, it's quite an easy contact point to start off with.
Great. And for those who don't know much about Singapore, I've had the pleasure of being there twice. One of the most tiniest countries in terms of land size, but actually when you look at GDP, quite enormous, right? So it's quite an anomaly in many ways, Singapore. Perhaps you could just give us a quick kind of background, population, GDP, you know, it doesn't have to be those questions, but just give people that don't know much about Singapore as a market a quick feel of what it's like.
Sure. Maybe I can share. I think this is an area where I can share a slide or two as well.
Perfect. That would be wonderful. You
Let
should
me
have permission to share.
Yeah, I do.
Great.
So I believe most people should be able to see this.
Yeah.
So to give you a rough idea about Singapore, strength in numbers, naturally these numbers are growing year over year. But our population size essentially is just over 5.5 million. Our total land area is 733 kilometers. So that gives you a better idea of how small we are. You may get thrown off by the resident population as well. It's just because that's purely just the Singapore citizens or permanent residents in Singapore, and that's at 4 million. So that already shows you the sheer difference in how many foreigners are in Singapore, right? As their ground base, essentially. GDP wise, and again, these numbers may reflect last year's GDP as opposed to this year. 643 billion, that's about 482 US. Top trading partners, China, the US, Europe, and of course Malaysia as well, who we used to be a part of as well. And not sure how much time we have for me to share all this. Sarah, by all means, if I'm going too much in depth, then by all means just jump in. To give everyone a rough idea of why Singapore is known as a gateway as well, it's because of our high ranks in certain competencies, right? Things like logistics competencies, timeliness of service. These are all factors that have and measures that have been made in various industries that have also allowed Singapore to be ranked in a certain way. Connectivity, I mentioned earlier about how Singapore is a hub of multiple industries, flights being one of them. I believe most people would have, in one way or another, connected through Singapore sometime in their lives, at least once. It's also one of the most busiest ports in Southeast Asia, at least. I'm not sure if it's one of the busiest in the world, but I'm sure we're up there. Diverse ecosystems. We have numerous global MNC headquarters located in Singapore, especially in the logistics industry. DHL, FedEx. If I'm not wrong, DHL, just I guess a fun fact for you, DHL used to have its headquarters in Hong Kong up until last year, and then they moved to Singapore as well. Mainly to show, right, that Singapore has provided a fairly stable landscape for a lot of these headquarters to start operating out of. So again, a few rankings: world's best business environment. These are all quoted from reports, by the way. It's not something that SFA just cooks up on our own. Asia's most competitive economy, top in Asia for IP right protection, and Southeast Asia's most innovative country as well. So yeah, going back to what I was talking about, the hub as well. Singapore is known for being a talent supply chain, regulatory framework hub as well, with strong technological capabilities, highly educated workforce, and of course, we talk about the innovation, and then that leads to the finance hub as well. GDP for 2022, just as a rough reference for you guys, all this information can be found through a quick Google search as well, I'm fairly certain. But I will share some of my slides with Sarah to disseminate to the rest of you as well. So you can see how the GDP is split up, manufacturing being one of the larger areas as well as wholesale trade. And then you have your finance and insurance as well as a close third. I mentioned this previously. A lot of MNCs, larger companies who have offices or headquarters in Singapore. This is just a few examples. Sorry, this was a few of examples from the Asia Pacific region, and then these are examples from the rest of the world, essentially. Maybe after this slide, I will stop with the slides for a while. Essentially, this paints quite a great picture of Singapore's fintech center and how we progressed, right? So on the top, you will see, sorry, screen is being covered on my side. So you'll see the various different tools that we have. You have your innovation network, innovation effect, right? The innovation effect essentially is the toolkits that you have. So you have your MES grants, for example, your accelerators that promote innovation within the ecosystem. Your network effect is where MES comes in and they play a very strong hand in this. This is where the various projects that MES has, Project Greenprint, Project Orchid. I won't go into details about this. You can probably find extensive information about the various projects that MES has on the MES website as well. But essentially all these projects help incorporate innovations within Singapore, things from your cross-border payments systems to the internal payment systems as well. Ecosystem effect, as Sarah mentioned, I met her at the Singapore Fintech Festival. It is large. It is essentially the largest fintech festival in the world, held every November of every year. I genuinely encourage everyone to try and experience that at least once. If you are within this industry, it's a good eye opener, and it's a great place for you to network and gain extremely good insight from people all around the world. Obviously, Elevandi is one of the main organizers of Singapore Fintech Festival, and Singapore Fintech Association, we come on as knowledge partners to support the efforts. Then you have your regulation effect, which comes from MES once again with your regulatory sandbox, your payment service acts, and then finally you have your platform effect. The platforms are essentially platforms that have all started as projects by MES, our regulators, and then they have essentially then been given birth to platforms that operate on its own as well. So Checkfin, Apex, Proxera. Apex, for example, used to be a platform that MES started where startups could essentially list their solutions or their products so that people looking for specific solutions can essentially just use the platform to search for any type of solution, let's say an AI solution, for example. And Apex would then tabulate the results for them to choose from which vendors to go to, essentially. Yeah, let me just take a pause there and see. Sorry, let me stop sharing. Let me just take a pause there and see if there's anything you guys have questions on, or if Sarah has something else she wants to delve into as well.
Yep, so just a reminder, everybody in the audience, if you have any questions, you can either raise your hand or pop them in the chat. I am going to ask a lot more, but if there's specific questions that come up about things that Shakil is saying as they're happening, please feel free to let us know that you want to ask questions. We want to make it as interactive and useful for you all as possible. I guess I don't have so much of a question, but sort of a comment, Shakil, because I think, sharing what you did about how, Singapore's, I guess, strategy to be that hub, whether that's finance, transport, whatever it is, it's quite a unique situation and a commitment from multiple government departments, regulators, sort of a real country-based commitment to that, which makes Singapore quite unique. And one of the I guess comments or questions, I'm not sure, I think is interesting to think about is, we often see, and I've heard comments about how other associations should strive to be like Singapore Fintech Association, but actually Singapore is quite unique. It's not just a case of copying and pasting what you've done, because your GDP, the sort of the growth that you have, the government mindset is quite unique.
Yeah, I think we were talking about this in the last time we had a chat as well. I mean, the success of the association also is heavily due to the fact that we have very strong leaders in the various different industries of our government as well, with very clear visions as well, right? We've also been blessed with MES, who have essentially been have worked themselves up to be one of the strongest central banks and regulators in the world. Highly recognized, highly respected by various countries as well. And I think that has landed a very good impression for the Fintech Association as well, because we work hand in hand with MES on various projects throughout the year. And I think that definitely lends credibility to us as well. But yeah, definitely most of the thanks goes out to the government bodies who do the initial legwork. And I think that's very important to remember.
Yeah, I think it's sort of everyone's association can only be successful within what is happening in their local area, right? So you sort of demonstrate what can be achieved with the right mindset, the right leadership, the right vision and strategy of the country and the association at the same time. And you also mentioned MAS. So I know a few people joined late. So MAS is the Monetary Authority Singapore, your central bank. And, you know, sort of, I know a lot of people on this call, one of the questions that we have had a lot is, how do you build a relationship with your regulator? How do you get your regulator to recognize your association? But you have quite a different relationship. You didn't need to do that. Perhaps you can just tell us, and then there was a couple of questions about, you know, your relationship with the central bank. You know, can you tell us more about how that relationship works and how it came, you know, obviously came about in the first place as well?
I think it helps that essentially, for those who are not aware, Singapore only has one central bank and one regulator, and they're both the same entity. Right? Just in case anyone isn't clear on that. So MAS, it also helps that MAS has a fairly large team that's dedicated to financial services and the fintech industry as well. So when we first started, like I mentioned, Chief Fintech Officer announced the association's birth. So having that already, I guess, already gives it a lot of credibility, right? If the Chief Fintech Officer of that country, of MES, says that the Fintech Association is going to be started with the intention to support the ecosystem's growth locally and for incoming companies as well. I think a lot of self-promotion is already done there because you have the backing of such an individual, right? And I do see a question as well about how was it promoted by the central bank. So short answer to that is yes. Not so much. I wouldn't say it's so much an angle of MES or the central bank is promoting, but rather an individual that represents the central bank promoted the idea of the Fintech Association formation.
How do you, I'm curious to know how you balance that relationship between MAS and Singapore Fintech Association. How do you make sure, because obviously you are representing the fintech industry and they might have different views and opinions from the central bank. How do you balance that tightrope to make sure, you know, I guess that sort of the views are heard? And then Edwin, I see your hand up, we'll come to you next.
So I think the balance it's sort of a gray area, right? But MES has always been fully aware that the Fintech Association is a standalone entity. While we were supported heavily by them in our formation through, I guess, making news, right, about the Fintech Association being formed. At the end of the day, MES realizes that the central bank's agenda has to be separate as well at times. So we essentially balance that out by maintaining relationships with the various departments in MES. We have a bi-monthly meeting with them. We also have a monthly meeting with the payments department of MES. The department that looks after payment services, right? To be clear, right? And then every quarter as well, we open up the floor for a Chief Fintech Officer to have something similar to an Ask Me Anything session. So every quarter he comes in to meet the people of the ecosystem to share his thoughts about the fintech landscape, to answer questions about current trends, for example. And essentially it's just a network and find out more from the ground as well. That's in a nutshell. I mean, there's various other things that we do as well. The list could go on and on. For example, at the end of 2022, we have various working groups, and the buy now pay later, the buy now pay later pillar essentially has been going in Singapore for quite a bit. So what we did was we pulled together the buy now pay later players within Singapore and formed a working group. Through that working group, we then formulated a code of conduct that all buy now, pay later providers now have to adhere to. Back in 2022, buy now, pay later was not regulated by MAS. It actually still isn't to a certain extent. The end of last year, 2023, was when MAS finally implemented a ruling for all buy now, pay later providers to adhere to the code of conduct. So these are various ways where we juggle that relationship, right? At times, we do things on our own. We present it to the central bank or the regulator, depending on how you want to see them, and then we get their views from there as well. If it's something that if it's something that we can handle on their behalf, then we do so, right? And I think that's quite complimentary to them, and I think they see it that way as well, where some things we can that are very ground up initiatives. That's where the Fintech Association comes in to, I guess, not take over MAS, but to supplement their needs.
I like that. I mean, the idea of getting the industry itself to come up with its own code of conduct, is in newly emerging areas, it is a great way for the regulator sort of to listen to the industry and act appropriately at the right time. That's a lovely example. Thank you. I know Edwin had a question and had his hand up. So Edwin, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everyone. Shakil, thank you for the presentation. So thus far, the last time I was just thinking to myself, the last time I had read about MAS was in a course, which means I'm either growing old or you guys are moving too fast in your ecosystem. One of the two. So I'm hail from Uganda, Digital Frontiers Association, one of these founding members. My concern or my question is, how can we promote partnerships or learnings such as this one, and even physical interactions between the two ecosystems? My feeling is that we are in danger of probably reinventing the wheel in Africa if we do not reach out for more partnerships. For example, there is the Singapore Fintech Festival, which I'm quite interested in attending, just to look at latest technologies and look to secure partnerships. That's one. So how do we secure partnerships that help both ecosystems learn from each other, exchange skills and talent, and then come up with something fantastic? The other one is, as far as regulators are concerned, our regulators in Africa are have taken a stance more of clamping down on anything that they do not understand, instead of working together with innovators to nurture new technologies. And normally what opens their eyes is if there's a reference to a market that has done probably what the Singapore ecosystem has done. Any tips on how to change the regulator, how you guys have changed the regulator's mindset, probably from a strict overbearer to a partner? Those are my two questions. Partnerships, and then how do we smoothen over the regulators to now be innovation promoters? Thank you.
Thanks, Edwin, for your questions. I guess I'll tackle the easier question first, which is the partnerships. Right? I think the best way to and forgive me if I'm oversimplifying your question, but I think the best way to, one, be able to partner with other associations and also learn from others as well, right? Because every association is most likely on a different trajectory in terms of their development and their stages. I mean, the best way to do so is, one, this may be cliche to say, but I guess you don't want to reach for the stars, right? It wouldn't make a lot of sense for an overly developed association to partner with a very underdeveloped association at the same time, because then the jarring differences may not allow you to utilize the experiences and the info as much. right? You'd want to find someone within your region who is, one, easier to meet with on a regular basis, and two, more relatable in terms of the insight that they can share on how you can grow. I think that's one of the key points to starting off with. And the reason why I say this is mainly because for us, for example, we are one of the associations that have grown exponentially ever since COVID, especially in the Southeast Asian region. So when we meet people from the associations in Vietnam, for example, or even Thailand, there is a difference in the development of the association. So sometimes it ends up being a position where we can share insight and we can share know-how about how to improve on certain things, but the ability to take that information and actually put it to good use may not always be the case, right? Because of, like I said, the differences in development. I mean, other factors, of course, right? Your central bank, how much they support you, your regulators, how much they support you, how the FIs are doing in your country also affects everything that you do. See, I said I wanted to summarize it. In the end, I'm rambling, right? But that's essentially my thoughts on question 1. Question 2, though, to be honest, I believe that no one can probably answer that question, right? Regulators, central banks will always do what they want to do. Naturally, I foresee that the only way of getting them to change their minds or adapt a different approach would be if they were to, one, either approach another regulator or central bank in another country that can advise them on how to make improvements, or to give them that reassurance, or two, they are approached by another country as well, right? Generally, even for MAS, no matter how closely we work with them, they're never going to come to us, the association, and be like, how can we improve, right? They always have high-level guys who are making that decisions and carefully crafting out that journey for the central bank or the regulator. So yes, I apologies, but yes, question number 2 is extremely difficult to answer.
Well, I don't think any of us would be here or probably so passionate about forming associations if that was an easy question to answer. I think it's a really great question though, because and I think they connect. For me, those two questions really connect together. How your regulator is and the way they approach regulations will also help the growth of the industry, and the influence of the growth of the industry also influences how successful an association can be, or how what you're driving. I mean, the things that this is sort of where I'd love to move into now. The kind of activities that Singapore Fintech Association are doing are quite different. There's not the need, because of the different regulatory landscape, and I think that's really, I think it's really interesting. If you're trying to build the relationship or grow that relationship right at the beginning, which is perhaps where some of our members on the call are right now, that's almost a tougher place to be in. What kind of activities you can do are hindered by regulatory issues, or even just how the central bank views you as an association. But if you can break through that, and I think that's probably Edwin, one of the roles we should think about. We've talked about as the alliance, we're bringing together all sorts of different entities from across the globe. How can we share and learn from each other more in these kind of sessions? But also, how can we maybe that we need to set up a little group that tackles the concepts, or puts together some principles about how we how we interact and engage with regulators. Are there gold standards like Singapore that we can share? I know Rwanda, also having recently spent time in Rwanda, I was impressed at their government decisions as well. That it's not dissimilar to me, some of the choices they're making in Rwanda to Singapore, trying to be a hub for finance, for transport, for many things. So yeah, maybe that's sort of a note for us to work on as the alliance, that how can we leverage from those who are doing it really well, and put them into sort of tangible case studies or examples that then we can use with other regulators in other countries to try and unlock the door to those conversations. But it could be different. I think it's also worth noting it could be different cultures. The culture of a central bank or any kind of regulator will be very cautious culture. It has to be. It's what they're there for. Whereas when we're talking about and working in fintechs, we tend to be very innovative, and that kind of culture clash, the way of approaching things, will also always be a challenge no matter where you are in the world. But I'd love to talk about, we're roughly halfway through. So Shakil, I'd love to talk a little bit about what activities that you're doing. What are you giving your members? What kind of value are your members seeing? And also try and understand, and this is a great question that Ali has put there, is funding. I mean, I know that you employ a lot of staff. I know that you've got reasonable levels of funding, which is way more than many of others on the call. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about your activities and also that business model and funding that you have.
Sure. Give me a second. Sorry about that. Okay, so I guess I don't want to talk about funding per se, right? It's more about sustainability. How the association can maintain a certain level of sustainability while not tanking everything to the ground, right? Especially with the hard work that we're putting in. I mean, this is sort of I guess it's a touchy subject for a lot of people. For SFA, we've been lucky because and I feel like a broken record, right, every time I say this, but we've been lucky because we've been our beginnings have already been supported by our central bank and regulator quite a bit. So in that support as well, what they did was they also made sure that to a certain point of a year, they will continue to support us. But when I say support, it's not through direct funding, if you will. The association still has to strive to make sense of how it can reach sustainability. So the current state we're in right now is we make our funding essentially comes from there's a few areas, but I'll simplify it into three main areas. The first one, of course, is membership fees. And understandably, our association right now, I don't know about everyone else's, in terms of size. Singapore Fintech Association has about 730 corporate members right now. When I say corporate members, sorry, I have an extremely dry throat today. When I say corporate members, these are essentially your small, medium, large, and then your unicorns. These are fintech firms, essentially, comprises of your FIs, law firms, insurance firms, for example. And then you have your consultancy firms, your data-driven consultancy firms, your Mercer, KPMG, what have you, right? So we have about 730. Then we have a differentiation in membership fees as well, right? And which is based off the member company's revenue. So if it's under $1 million in revenue for that year, it's priced at a certain amount. If it's over $1 million of Singapore dollars for that year, it's priced at a different amount as well. So that's one. Second one is one of the more successful initiatives that Singapore Fintech Association has done so far is our business mission trips. So every year we organize at least 4 trips. And these 4 trips are targeted at empowering the local community firms in their expansion plans. So we help them with their go-to-market. How do we do this? Essentially, over the span of the 8 years that SFA has been alive, essentially, our focus has been on bridging gaps and making sure that key relationships are formed, right? So what we've done over the years is we've essentially established very strong relationships with a lot of market leaders, be it your fintech associations, be it government bodies, so your central banks, your regulators, if they are 2 different bodies, larger banks in various markets as well. And what this does is it helps us to organize meetings for our member companies, right? These are meetings that on their own, they will never, okay, I don't want to say never, but it will be very hard for these member companies to attain such meetings on their own, because a lot of the larger banks in these countries, for example, are not going to take their time to meet one company on its own, right? Whereas if you lend a platform that we provide where, let's say, we just came back from Japan in March, to give you a better example, and on our Japan trip, we had 16 member companies, 19 individuals on that trip. Sorry, 21 individuals on that trip. So these banks, regulators, central banks, and especially the larger FIs, for example, right? They're always more keen because they can essentially meet multiple people at one time, and they can pick and choose who they want to have follow-up discussions with and whatnot. So I'm digressing quite a bit, but the reason why I'm explaining this to you is because this is where members see the most worth for their membership fees. We charge accordingly for the trips. So there's a separate charge for all these trips because we handle things like accommodation, transportation. We cover some meals whenever there are days that are too tightly packed and we have to go from literally meeting to meeting to meeting. Then we cover certain meals for that. But essentially, yes, so there is a slight profit to that. Not much so, I will say. We don't make much of our trips, but there is a slight profit to that, and that contributes to our sustainability. And then the last one, of course, like I said, we also have training programs, right? Although, again, our training programs are also in collaboration with a lot of government bodies. We have government bodies here, Workforce Singapore, for example, Skills Future Singapore. These are all government bodies with initiatives to drive upskilling of the people in Singapore, right? We also had launched last year a career conversion program, which is targeted at mid-career switchers. And we fine-tune it so that it trains people in a certain specific role. So for the past 3 runs, we're on our 3rd run right now, and the role was quality assurance engineer. So this is where it goes from a 3-month training program to a 6-month on-the-job training program as well, all inclusive. And then from there, companies are then given the choice whether they would like to hire the individual as well. So all these training programs also have a cost involved, heavily subsidized by the government, of course, but we make a small fraction of that as well from that. So those are the 3 main areas I would probably highlight, right, that contributes to our sustainability. I will tell you this though, our operational costs right now are still above our sustainability efforts, right? Naturally so, and we are in our 8th year. We're extremely active, but that's just how it is really. Thankfully, MES does support us from time to time. So when I started this off with how MES started off by supporting us, it just means that they look at our financials, and for that year, if we're lacking in X amount of dollars, then they will help us on a reimbursement, right? Just so that we can level that out instead of going to the following year in a negative. That's essentially it.
And I think, it's heartening and probably slightly maybe disheartening for people to hear that, because, it is really challenging to run an association and make it. I mean, none of us are in this for profits, I mean, that's what we start fintech unicorns for, and hope that may be where we go. But running associations is challenging to cover the operational costs of employing the staff and running the activities, and it can be a real chicken and egg problem, and we suffer from that at the Alliance. I know people on this call suffer from it. How do you need to show value to your members to charge membership fees, but how do you run activities when you don't have any money to run the activities with? It can be quite challenging to sort of break that cycle. Obviously you guys are expanding and growing, but still in some ways, not able to fully cover all of your costs through membership fees or activities yet. And I like how you diversify your sources of income, because actually if we rely on just membership fees only, that's never going to work as a business model.
I think it'll be close to impossible, to be honest, to
Yeah.
solely rely on membership fees. It'll be very tough.
Mm. And so diversifying your source of income and running projects that you can generate some income from it seems to be a reasonable business model. What about sponsorship? Do any of the big financial institutions or fintechs in Singapore sponsor the association or its activities in any way?
Nope. I'll be brutally honest. No, the answer is no. Right. We do have one-offs where, let's say, so we try and do like a industry networking once a quarter. Usually SFA fronts the bill for that, but once in a while we'll get an industry player who is feeling kind one quarter, and then they're like, oh, we have extra marketing funds. Let me sponsor this networking session, for example. That happens maybe once a year if we're lucky. Last year it didn't happen at all, but I won't say it doesn't. It's not like it never happens, right? It does sometimes. But the truth is we almost hardly ever get sponsored for any of the initiatives we try. I will say this though, so just 2 weeks ago, SFA, we were quite ambitious this year. We tried to run our own larger scale event. So usually what we do is we run, and I guess I probably should have started with this earlier on. SFA runs anything in the ballpark of 60 to 80 events a year, right? That averages out to at least one event a week. Rightfully so, though, not every event that we do or webinar that we do will apply to everyone, but there is something for everyone across a month, let's say. 2 weeks ago, we decided to run our own inaugural larger scale event. So our target was 300 guests. We had essentially one panel, two fireside chats, one panel discussion, 2 masterclasses. It ran from 9 a.m. to about 2 p.m. That was one where we reached out for sponsorships, managed to get sponsors to come in as well, to run the entire event. But I'll be honest with you, we just pulled up the numbers for the profit and loss for that event alone, and we ended up making a loss there, even with sponsors, right? So the reality is, a lot of times when you are lucky to get sponsors, you're not always going to be in a situation where the association still comes up with a profit, right? To be perfectly honest with all of you, to everyone here, right? We essentially lost $2,000. It's not much, but we lost $2,000. Our estimated spend in total for the entire event was probably like 45. So yeah, just to give you a better idea.
Thank you for your openness and honesty. I think it's pitfalls that we're all learning from, and events in particular can scale quite rapidly in expenses. Yeah, I know I'm asked many times at the Alliance, would I run an event for Africa or for Asia? And my response right now has always been no, because it's a risky thing to do something on that bigger scale. The bigger your events, the more you have to invest, the riskier it is, but also the greater the payoff could be. I mean, one would hope that even though you made a loss on that event, maybe it's the first time, the second time it will be different. And there was a lot of learning, I hope, shared at that event. But you've got to balance, what it is that you're willing to risk and what impact that you think you're going to have from those events and conversations. It's a timely reminder, especially all of you that are, there's quite a few people have been, discussing partnerships with large scale events producers, and, to really think through, the costs involved in running events can be enormous, but the impact can be great. It just depends on how it balances. But yeah, I think it's phenomenal to hear 60 to 80 events a year. I mean, no wonder it was quite difficult for me to get in your diary for this hour, Shakil. But that's a phenomenal amount of activity. And I like how you said that there's something for every member at least once a month. And I think it comes back to, people are going to be paying membership fees. They need to feel some sort of value from being part of the association.
Yeah, definitely. I will want to add also that, I mean, our fees are relatively low. Although we just finished our AGM for this year and then we made a motion to increase our fees. But essentially before this motion, our fees for the lower category, which was members with a million in revenue, less than a million in revenue, was $100 a year, right? And that's been the same price since formation in 2016. And then when we compared that to other associations in the market right now, it's more leaning towards the 500, 600, 700, right? But we maintained it. So yeah, when I say there will be something for everyone at least once a month, that is true. We definitely make it a point to make sure that there is something for everyone, right? Even if it's just a networking, for example, where they can mingle, maybe get some leads out of it. But at the end of the day, it's still something. I did also want to add that for most of our events, we usually cater as well. So it's either light bites, coffee, tea. Sometimes for our longer events, we even have like a buffet style dinner for the event. So yeah, so it adds to the cost as well. So essentially, by attending the event, someone does somewhat get your money's worth already because we are feeding you as well.
I like that you're feeding them as well. But no, I mean, you can't hold a networking without having some sort of drink. I mean, we know that.
Yeah.
Many of the people on the call have been sort of running events for a while, and we always say, what's the budget for, are we a tea and coffee refreshment and biscuits, or can we afford like a cocktail or a buffet? The budget determines whether, how much of a refreshment costs, but you always need to, and I think that's interesting, kind of insider knowledge. I mean, it's quite interesting how I've worked with several entities who want to create and run these local events, and then they forget to add that, which is incredibly important to add that in your budget. But I also think it was interesting for you to talk about, two questions come up for me. One obviously is dormancy is the death of associations. I think not running regular activities is people don't see you in existence if you're not being regular. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And then my second question is, obviously, we are told, a lot of people have been told here, Singapore Fintech Association is your benchmark for people that are doing a good job. So I'd love to know who your benchmarks are. Who do you look up to? Where do you get sort of your inspiration to continue to grow from?
I don't want to say we have anyone per se to anyone or any association or any entity in general to look up to, right? I think for us, the driving force is always whatever we spend time doing in terms of organization or collecting feedback or anything of that sort, our main aim is always there has to be impact with whatever we do, right? If there's no impact, then most likely it's a wasted effort. Right? So that's why a lot of times, and we go back to the whole sustainability thing, even if we make a loss, if we truly notice that there's an impact, whether be it through people's comments at the event or post-event feedback or something, if there's positive impact, then we're okay with the fact that we're losing money, right? Because that's essentially what the association's for, right? It's to drive growth and impact those within the ecosystem, where essentially in any industry, there's not going to be an entity that is solely driven on driving impact, right? And funneling growth within that pillar or that ecosystem, that landscape. That's where the association essentially comes in. So yeah, the driving force is essentially impact. I won't say it's anything else.
Well, that's fascinating. Camilla and I were having a conversation the other day about everything we do with our time has to be impactful. Otherwise, we stop it and do something else with it, because your time is always limited. I mean, we could probably employ hundreds of people, across all the associations that we've got here today and at the Alliance, but we can't afford to do that. So we have to use the staff that we have got efficiently and effectively. And I think that's one of my other questions to you. How many staff do you now have at Singapore Fintech Association?
We have 12 full-time staff.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we have 12.
Well, which is a very impressive number, actually. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I will say that we've grown over the past year, I think. When I first joined in 22, there was probably like 8 of us, or no, less than 8, 7, 6 or 7. And then over the past year, we've grown quite a bit as well, because we've ramped up quite a bit of the initiatives that we run. Okay, I don't want to say extremely active, but we are definitely more active now than we were back 2 or 3 years ago. There's a lot of things being done in terms of grants, processing, or other initiatives like our mission trips, for example. We also run initiatives similar to our mission trips, where we do very specialized targeted meetings for a smaller number of people as well. So this takes up a lot of time as well, and it just adds to the load, I guess, right?
It does, but I mean, you're one of the only fintech associations, I believe, who do offer this grants to fintechs. But that's a partnership with MAS, if I'm correct.
Yes. So once again, credit goes to our central bank, right? Because the way they've structured it essentially is, we have this certification where SFA can certify fintech companies, and it's called a fintech certification. So the way MES has structured it is, and it's also a way for them to funnel more membership to us, right? And more sustainability areas to us. So there's a charge for fintech certification, and certain grants by MES require the entities to be fintech certified. So it's a way of MES pushing the traffic to the association and then back to them as well. Right?
That's a really interesting sort of circular system there, right? So MAS are saying, okay, we trust Singapore Fintech Association to certify the fintechs, and therefore we are going to also include that in our criteria. It's like sort of, in order to apply for the grant, you have to have the certification, so that they don't have to reduplicate some of the checks that you would have done under that. So it's sort of farming out some work to you guys to do for that they can then trust and assure, but also then means that you are having people having to pay to do that, and also become a member, and then see the value of being a member. So it just creates this kind of movement of a great attraction for you, and a clearer role that you're playing is, I guess, something not completely like a self-regulating entity, but moving in that kind of direction.
Yep. I also see a question, or I guess a comment or a question about what kind of certification is that. So you can go to the Singapore Fintech Association website, and you can read a bit more about it. But essentially what we do is we're certifying the company, right? That one is in fact a fintech company that has a fintech solution of some sort. Two, we review company documents as well, to make sure that it's a registered company. And the last one would just be to review the solution or the product that the company provides, to finalize the certification that yes, it is indeed a fintech company with a working solution or product.
Great, thank you for sharing that. I think that's really interesting. I know Sugand is from running FACE in India, and so I think that could be something, Sugand, that might work for you. So I think that's a great concept. But I really like the idea of how MAS is clearly giving and delegating trust in the Singapore Fintech Association, which is creating that that sort of that shared, like shared pool resource, it's funneling fintechs in your direction, basically, which I think is, and hopefully making life a little bit easier for MAS, not having to run all these checks themselves, but being able to trust that you've done them for them. I think that's, again, another, I mean, you're clearly very blessed with the support that you've had from MAS, and I'm sure there are many people on the call who are quite jealous. But I guess maybe, this is a really good motivation for us. For those that don't have that kind of support, how can we try and, find ways in which we can build some of that support, and showcase what has been achieved in Singapore as a result of that support. I know we're right at the end. If anybody has any burning questions, please just quickly pop them in the chat. But I'm going to ask you, Shakil, like my final question to you is, what key recommendations would you make to others who are leading and forming associations?
Sorry, you said forming associations?
Yeah, so those who are in the process of forming them right now, or maybe early on in the journey, maybe where you were pre-COVID, what kind of recommendations would you make to them? What do you think is going to help them on their journey to emulate somewhere what you've managed to achieve?
Right. I mean, this goes back to my point earlier about how it's very hard to truly give advice, right? If you're in different stages, right? For someone who's very junior or just starting to develop, essentially, I mean, what we give out in terms of info may or may not apply, right, in a lot of cases. But I will say this, and I think I mentioned it earlier, look at the neighbors around you. I think that's very important. The neighbors around you will essentially dictate your growth as well, because if they are already growing, you can essentially mirror what they've done, and from there try and reach the similar levels to how much growth they will achieve, and then from there work on how you can grow together rather than separately. It's becoming a stalemate at some point of me mentioning MES, but I think it's very different, right? Singapore, we're in a very unique position where our central bank has always been so strong. It's such strong forward-looking plans that have aided in our growth, right? COVID actually, to be honest, COVID actually did us a favor, because by locking everyone down, the only outlet people in the fintech industry got was through webinars that SFA organized, right? If not, a lot of people were kind of lost. They didn't know how to connect with people. So I think we were fairly lucky that we managed to utilize COVID in a benefit because that's when we saw an immediate jump in our membership numbers as well, right? I mean, naturally, we're not able to recreate something like that for others. But yeah, I would say learn from the neighbors in your surrounding region, especially, and then grow together. Because I think then you're stronger in teams, right, rather than individuals, especially if you're not really sure of your success rate just yet.
That's great. And I'm really glad you said that, because one of the things that we've introduced this year at the Alliance is the concept of, we've got some working groups that are talking about, how do you grow the vision and how do you lead these associations? How do you grow membership? And we're doing that across both Africa and Asia. So I think that's a really nice, maybe this is, sort of a good way in which we can sort of share and learn within each other and come up with proposals and ideas through those working groups. So I think that's, hopefully we're already doing something that maybe will help implement some of the recommendations and advice that you've got there, Shakil.
Great.
I'm aware we're 4 minutes over. We could probably talk for 7-8 hours about this. There's lots of a few more questions coming in, but perhaps, Shakil, you can send us some of sort of your PowerPoint slides that I can share. I'll also share with some of the links as well to the website, so that some of the members can go. And then if we still have questions from our members, maybe we can just pop them in an email across to you, Shakil, and you can help us unpick them.
Sure. That sounds good. It may take me some time to get back to you, but I'll do my best.
That's fine. We know how busy you are running your 60 to 80 events every year. We very much can see how active you are as an association, and any support and guidance and help that you have and you can pass on will be very much appreciated. One last thing before we leave, I'd love everybody to take a little bit of a picture just to say this event happened. So those who can put on their cameras and show us your wonderful smiling faces, please do so, because it's always wonderful to see you all. And then we can take a little bit of a snap so that we can say, hey, this is who, a snapshot of who was here.